On today's episode of Factions Compared, we take a look at hover tanks. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to Star Wars Factions Compared. Today's episode is sponsored by the EckhartsLadder Discord. If you want to talk about Star Wars, science fiction generally, Warhammer, Halo, with me and over 5,000 other members, join the EckhartsLadder Discord at discord.gg/EckhartsLadder. It's really easy, even if you've never used Discord before, and it's a good time to join because we'll be having our first ever game night within the next couple of days. Alright, so back to the topic at hand. Now, I've talked about ground vehicles before in Factions Compared. However, today we're looking specifically at hover tanks, i.e. repulsor lift vehicles. First off, we have the TX225 GAV-R Occupier hover tank. The Rogue One visual guide explains that the TX225 is a Rothana drive yard creation and comes in two different variants, the R and the W, presumably standing for wheels and repulsor lifts. The two variants are exactly the same except for their propulsion system, and in Rogue One we see the wheeled GAV-W model. I find most aspects of this tank, but especially its combat capabilities, to be fairly underwhelming. The guide explains that by this point, Rothana drive yards was a shadow of its former self, and in my opinion, it shows. The Occupier's main weapons are a pair of forward-facing double blaster cannons and a locked anti-personnel laser. Obviously, this is not the most versatile armament, and the weapons of the Occupier really work best in narrow or tight urban spaces where the enemy is trapped in front of you. In any other situation, the Occupier is going to be basically useless. Strangely enough, we do see a modified version of the 225 in one of the Han Solo comics, which smartly has a turreted blaster cannon where the command hatch is, but that doesn't seem to be at all standard. I think it's clear that the Occupier is really meant to serve in an anti-riot/transport role. We see the wheeled variant used in Rogue One when the Empire is transporting kyber crystals, and a large part of the vehicle seems to be designated as storage space. So I guess the tank makes sense with that purpose kept in mind, but still the weapon placement and really the lack of weaponry still kind of boggles my mind. The GAV-R uses a special highly durable but light composite armor, which unfortunately doesn't translate to any sort of speed for the vehicle, but instead allows it to move even with its fairly large frame. Also, because I know some of you may be wondering, the exposed driver and commander actually can close their hatches and operate the vehicle from behind its armor. The repulsor lift Occupier has less stability and a more obvious sensor profile when compared with the wheeled version. However, that's something that's going to be common amongst all vehicles on this list. The Empire did use other hover tanks, especially in Star Wars Legends, but we either didn't get enough information about them or they were based very heavily off the TX Saber tank, which we'll discuss right now because it's more closely associated with the Republic. The TX-130 Saber tank is a fan favorite, appearing in Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2 as a light tank for the Republic. If you're wondering why the Saber and the Occupier both share the TX prefix, it's because they're both Rothana drive vehicles. The Saber, however, was created at the height of the company's power and success. I actually think the TX-130 is a pretty fascinating vehicle. It's a combination of speed and quick-hitting firepower, not unlike, say, a Jedi. For its size, it was fairly well armed with two medium laser cannons, a missile launcher, and a turreted weapon, which was either a beam cannon or a laser cannon, depending on the loadout. This varied weaponry allowed the TX-130 to serve in either an anti-vehicle or personnel role. The turret especially is a nice touch, although any gunner using it is totally exposed. It does help cover at least some of the tank's blind spots. However, while it could function in an anti-vehicle role, it really was fairly light, especially when compared with large Separatist tanks. It was lightly armored, and although it did have a shield, really couldn't slug it out with larger vehicles. However, this lack of armor really drove its main advantage: speed. The TX-130 could easily hit 300 plus kilometers per hour and was by far faster than any other vehicle on the list. In my mind, this extra speed is easily a fair swap for its less armor. When combined with its weapons, it would definitely be classified as a light, maybe medium vehicle, but it could also operate as a scout and was really effective when used in a hit and run style. The main design flaw I see in this vehicle is the exposed turreted gunner. I understand it was likely done for balance reasons within Star Wars Battlefront, but still I wish it's something something that the Canon had changed. Moving on, let's take a look at the T2B, the Rebels repulsor lift tank. This vehicle appeared alongside the much heavier T4B in Star Wars Empire at War. However, the T4B is not eligible for this list because it makes use of shreds rather than repulsor lifts. In my mind, this is the strangest tank on this list. It's pretty much exclusively anti-infantry, armed only with the quad light laser cannon. And I say it's strange, but it does make sense. It's clearly meant to operate in an escort role, protecting larger vehicles from infantry, but I don't understand why it doesn't have at least a secondary missile launcher. It is fairly fast and has a deflector shield, so it can engage in lightning strikes against enemy infantry, but more often than not, that speed will be wasted because you're going to want the T2B matched with some sort of heavier walker or tank. Still, as I stated, it's phenomenal against infantry. It can work as a scout, and I bet you those quad laser cannons could even take down enemy fighters. But its relatively light armor and its lack of a missile launcher I think really hamstrings it as a general purpose tank. Finally, we have the Armored Assault Transport, the Separatist AAT. Now, the CIS actually have several hover tanks, including the Super Tank, the AAT, and the GAT. I went with the AAT because it was the most prominent of the three, and the Super Tank never really entered mass production. I also consider the Super Tank to be almost a super weapon. If I included it here, I think it would fairly easily get the #1 spot, just due to its durability. I really like the AAT, not only its design, but also its function. Let's talk first about weaponry. The AAT is very heavily armed and deserves its name as a tank. First off, it has a very powerful main weapon which is turreted and can be fired and aimed independently of the main body. The cannon gives the tank some versatility. It can attack hard targets, other vehicles, or even shell enemy positions like artillery with its effective and powerful long-range sensors. The versatility is furthered by the secondary weapons on the AAT. Aside from the main heavy laser, the tank also has anti-personnel short-range blasters, a secondary laser on the main cannon, and 6 projectile launchers near the bottom of the tank's body. I like the launchers especially. The bottom part of the tank is dedicated largely to housing ammunition, and it can house different types separately. This allows the tank to swap out its ordnance before or even during the mission. With those launchers plus the anti-personnel blasters, the AAT also can work quite well in small confined spaces, as long as they keep the enemy in front of them at least. The tank is not shielded, which is definitely a downside, though it is very heavily armored. The tank's main design flaw, I would say, is its weak spot at the rear. Not only is there a weapons blind spot, but most of the tank's primary systems are stored there. This is a clear vulnerability. However, if the tank is operating with support, it can be accounted for. If I were going to improve upon this vehicle, I would only really do 2 things. I would add an extra anti-personnel blaster facing backwards, and I would make it so the munitions could also be fired through the main cannon. With our description of the 4 tanks out of the way, let's now rank them from worst to best. At number 4 is the Empire's Occupier hover tank. Now, there's got to be a bit of an asterisk next to this because admittedly the Empire did have several other hover tank variants, but I just really don't think that this vehicle is very good. Yes, it can transport supplies, and I guess it works okay in urban environments, but the weapons are poorly placed and not very numerous. It just seems to be like a fairly slow moving target. There's a lot I would change about this vehicle, which is why it comes in at number 4. Number 3 is the Rebel Alliance and the T2B. The T2B is heavily specialized. It's very fast. It's used basically only in an anti-infantry role, which is fine I guess, but it really limits its usability. It needs larger, more powerful tanks in order to actually do any damage to hard points or other vehicles. If rocket launchers were added onto the vehicle, which I think would be a reasonable upgrade, it would be much improved, but I still don't think it would break the number 2 spot. We are of course down to the TX-130 Sabre and the AAT. I love both of these vehicles. The AAT is a behemoth with a lot of weapons, and the TX-130 is a very fast, light tank. It really depends which style you like more, because I don't think either does its specialization more effectively than the other. Personally, I like the AAT more, so I'm going to put the TX-130 at spot number 2. It's very fast, it's shielded, it has a decent amount of weapons, and I think it fits a nice niche within the Republic's overall military. However, I do like the AAT more, which is why it gets the number 1 spot. First of all, the tank bristles with weapons but still manages a decent speed and is fairly maneuverable. Its main cannon allows it to work as artillery, as a frontline battle tank, and in both open and closed spaces. It is somewhat vulnerable from the rear, but just generally I think it's a great vehicle, especially when used in conjunction with battle droids or smaller vehicles. From worst to best, those have been the hover tanks of the Empire, Rebel Alliance, Republic, and Confederacy of Independent Systems. It's all just been my opinion, however. Let me know what you think by voting in the upper right hand corner on which tank you think is best, and also by leaving me a comment down below. If you guys like this video, make sure to give it a like, and if you want to support the channel, consider checking out my Discord or one of my other social media sites. Thanks for watching. As always, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.